For the one fat boy, and here are my NBA game predictions for January 25th of 2022. Tonight there is 9 games. I will be going over the spreads and over-unders for each of the games, and I got both these from FanDuel. For the Pelicans at the 76ers, I'm going with Philadelphia -9. So for a few reasons, there's the 76ers are playing at home. The Pelicans played last night, and then there's no one really to stop Embiid on the Pelicans because it's going to be on Valanciunas, who can hang with him down low, but he's not fast enough. Then who is fast enough to slow down an Embiid that's strong enough to? No one. So if Embiid can get his outside shot going, I think this should be easy one for the Sixers, which it should be. A lot of pointers pointing to that. So as long as some role players step up for the Sixers, shouldn't be a problem. I will be going over 215.5 as Pelicans did play a close game last night, so we tired. That gives an advantage for Philadelphia and their offense to score a few more points than usual. And then I think the Pelicans, the 76ers, it really just depends on what team decides to show up. But I think the team that decides to show up tonight should be the team that should be in the top half of the conference, or at least top 2 of the conference, and I think that will put them over the edge. But Philadelphia, I would just bet just to win this game. Covering the spread might be a little bit of a stretch, but I'd lean towards that over than the Pelicans covering the +9. For Charlotte at Toronto, so if I were to choose a spread for this game, I would go Toronto -3.5. Personally, I would not touch this game with a stick for betting the spread or the over-under, because just by how random Charlotte has been playing. So that's why I wouldn't bet on this game. But if I had to, and I'm just going to use my logic to point out why I would choose these two options. So I'd go Toronto -3.5, because if this turns into a more defensive game, I think Toronto will win it out that way. Then if this becomes a shootout, I think Toronto can also hang in with the Hornets. So that's just his two options for Toronto to win this, because I believe it's more likely that both teams will be cold, or both teams are hot, rather than just Charlotte being hot and Toronto being cold. And it's also more likely that Toronto will be hot and Charlotte will be cold. So there's just more chances for Toronto to come out winning this game than there is Charlotte. Also, Charlotte's scoring's been kind of sporadic, while Toronto's been more of a steady line, within 5 points each game. We'll be going under 221 because actually we'll be leaning towards defensive, or Charlotte just being more cold, so under 221.5. But in reality, this is one of those games that it's just too tough to predict. I personally wouldn't predict it. For Denver at Detroit, so the last time these two teams played, which was just a couple days ago, Denver won by 6 on their home floor, but I think Denver will be a little more focused on the road and trying to get those wins to keep them in the playoffs. So they should win this game, but I think they can also cover the spread -7.5 and do some work on Detroit. We'll be going over 219 too, as I think it'll be a similar scoring output as was before, as Denver's defense not the greatest in the world, but I think their offense is much better than what Detroit can do with their defense. So Denver shouldn't have a problem scoring the ball at all. So Denver -7.5. I'd almost maybe go bump up the over a little, maybe just a couple of points, but not a lot, but maybe to 222. But they both teams should score a lot. For the Clippers at the Wizards, so I kind of view the Clippers as the Western Conference Wizards, and then the Wizards as the Eastern Conference Clippers, because currently they basically have the same record and they're basically in the same spot in the standings. And this is just another one of those games where I personally wouldn't bet the spread or the over-under, because you just don't know which team is going to show up. But if I had to, I'd lean towards Washington -4.5, just because they have all their players, or at least most of them, unlike the Clippers not having 2 of their stars. So that should be an advantage towards Washington, and Washington's also playing at home, which should be another advantage towards them. We'll be going over 216 as the Clippers, they can put up a lot of points, but they also can put up duds, and that goes the same for Washington too. But if I think Washington wins this, it's going to be because they scored the ball a lot. So that's why I lean towards over 216. But just a disclaimer, this is a game that I would not bet on for the spread or the over-under. For the Lakers at Brooklyn, so I'll be going with the Lakers minus 3.5 because there is rumors that Anthony Davis could come back to this game. And also, since they are playing in Brooklyn, Kyrie Irving can't play. So this should be a game the Lakers should win. It's like they just got to slow down Harden and some role players, which that shouldn't be too hard for them. But knowing the Lakers, that's a very big task for them. As I said in previous videos, I'd not bet on the Lakers, but just what these two teams have been throwing out, it's like I don't know. So the Lakers should come out with the win. It's just been like they got to keep their 500, and this is like one of those games where it's like they've been losing, but they've been winning, but they got to win this game to keep that 500 alive. So I think this is that game that they win. I will be going over 226 as I don't think defense will be played this game. That's just how these two teams played. So I think the over should hit. Like it really shouldn't hit without a problem. I wouldn't be surprised if this goes over 240, but would I bet that? No. But if I saw it, it's like wouldn't be surprised if it hits. But over 226 seems likely. For Sacramento at Boston, judging how Boston played last game against the Wizards, I think the Wizards play similar to the Kings as like very high scoring team and kind of weak defense. I think Boston should handle the Kings without a problem. They should be able to cover the 8.5 spread. They are playing on their home floor, so it's kind of tough floor to win on as long as Boston stays focused, just keeps their offense involved, because if their offense is going good, I feel like their defense plays a little better, but that's just kind of a trend for all basketball teams. But yeah, it's like as long as Tatum and Brown are engaged in the game, that's going to be tough for the Kings to try and beat those two if they're on their game. And no one on the Kings can really stop them. It's really just them. They just have to knock down their shots. I will be going over 219 as if Boston can have a similar scoring output as they did against the Wizards, and I think the Kings should be able to score more than 87 as that's how much the Wizards score. And I think Boston maybe. Well, if they scored 117 last game, I won't be surprised if they score over 120, but they should be within like 5 points of that 117. But I will be going with that over 219 though. For the Spurs at the Rockets, so the Spurs last 10 games they're 2-8, and then Rockets aren't too much better at 4-6, but I think the Spurs have just been struggling, so I'm just gonna go and bet with the Rockets, even though this is personally one of those games. I also want to bet on either, as it really just depends on which team decides to show up. It's like both teams, they're in the bottom of the Western Conference, so it's really just, I know especially for Houston, it's like you really don't know which team's going to show up, because they go toe-to-toe with the best, and then when it just comes to like some random games, they just get blown out by just a mid-tier team. So is really, if it's a close game throughout, I think the Spurs, well, if it's close game throughout, it's like I really wouldn't know who's going to win. So I'm just going to go with the team that has the plus spread, as they've been playing better in their last 10 games. So like there's a slight advantage to them playing at home, but they're both in Texas, so is it really home court advantage? But I will be going under 235.5, just because our score over 235 in a game for both teams. That means both of them have to be hot. I think one of these teams will like struggle for a quarter, especially, and that just makes it hard to cover the 235.5. For Minnesota at Portland, I'll be going with Minnesota -3. They've been playing very well, especially their last 10 games. They're 7-3, and then Portland, I think they've been figuring things out without Lillard, playing a little better here and there, like keeping games close. But I think their offense has been struggling because it's been very sporadic without having Lillard there. And it's going to be like McCollum trying to lead them. So that's why I just have to lean towards Minnesota -3, and also the under 227.5. Even though Minnesota, their games are really high scoring, Portland's, especially the last few games, it's just been really sporadic. Like leaning more towards the unders. So that's why I'm going with the under 227.5. Is just because Portland and their offense has just been struggling very hard, and I don't think Minnesota's defense is going to help that. So expect Minnesota probably to win by more than 3. I'd actually bet a little bit more than 3 for sure. For Dallas at Golden State, so I'm actually going to take Dallas plus 3.5. But this is also one of those games I wouldn't want to bet the spread or the over/under. I'd probably just bet on the player props because you don't know who's going to show up for Dallas and you don't know who's going to show up for Golden State. I just know these are two defensive teams, so I think it's just better to bet an under. I think 211.5 might be a little too far under, but that's where the spread stands currently. I'd maybe lean towards the under, like 216 to 218. But Dallas 3.5, I think just how like the Warriors games have been playing, like against the Jazz, that was 2 points. Dallas, they can hang with Golden State if it does turn into a shootout. Dallas has shooters, Warriors have shooters. If it does turn into a defensive game, both their teams' schemes for defense is like have slowed down a lot of NBA teams. So once again, this is one of those games that go either way. Should be an exciting game, but I would personally would not bet that spread. But if I had to, I just lean towards Dallas plus 3.5, as I do expect this game to be within like 3 points either way. But I will be betting towards a defensive game for this one, so we'll be betting the under. Thank you for watching. Comment any of your thoughts on the games. I just know the games the past weeks have been, well, especially past week, very random, really tough to predict. But once again, thanks for watching.